Good morning, guided reading group. It is Mrs. Engel coming at you from her kitchen table on this e-learning day. We've been talking about relationships and flowers for Algernon, about how Charlie was interacting with Miss Keenan and the doctors and the factory workers, and how his relationship changed as his intelligence grew, and how it will continue to change. In the Pearl, we're thinking about the relationships between Kino and his wife Juana and the town, and how the relationships change based on how the situations change. Today, I'm going to read to you a story called A Mother in Mannville by Marjorie Keenan Rawlings. The goal today is to pay attention to the relationship, to pay attention to how it changes, and then at the end what I'm going to ask you to do is rewrite the ending. Consider this like a pre-test, because one of the things you're going to be asked to do when you finish Flowers for Algernon is to rewrite the ending. So this is a little pre-test to see how well you do before we kind of give any guided instruction when you come back from spring break, which begins tomorrow. So without further ado, here is A Mother in Mannville by Marjorie Keenan Rawlings. The orphanage is high in the Carolina mountains. Sometimes in winter the snowdrifts are so deep that the institution is cut off from the village below, from all of the world. Fog hides the mountain peaks, the snow swirls down the valleys, and the wind blows so bitterly that the orphanage boys who take the milk twice daily to the baby cottage reach the doors with their fingers stiff in agony of numbness. Or when we carry the trays from the cooking house to the ones that are sick, Jerry said, we get our faces frostbit because we can't put our hands over them. I have gloves, he added. Some of the boys don't have any. He liked the late spring, he said. The rhododendron was in bloom, a carpet of color across the mountainside, soft as a May wind that stirred the hemlocks. He called it laurel. It's pretty when the laurel blooms, he said. Some of it's pink and some of it's white. I was there in autumn. I wanted quiet, isolation, and to do some troublesome writing. I wanted mountain air to blow out the malaria from the too long time in the subtropics. I was homesick, too, for the flaming of maples in October, for the corn shocks and the pumpkins and the black walnut trees and the lift of the hills. I found them all living in a cabin that belonged to the orphanage 1/2 mile beyond the orphanage farm. When I took to the cabin, I asked for a boy or a man to come and chop wood for the fireplace. The first few days were warm. I found what wood I needed about the cabin. No one came, and I forgot the order. I looked up from the typewriter one late afternoon, a little startled. A boy at the door, and my pointer dog, my companion, was at his side and had not barked to warn me. The boy was probably 12 years old, but undersized. He wore overalls and a torn shirt and was barefooted. He said, I can chop some wood today. I said, but I have a boy coming from the orphanage. I am that boy. You. But you're small. Size don't matter when chopping wood, he said. Some of the big boys don't chop good. I've been chopping wood at the orphanage a long time. I visualized mangled and inadequate branches for my fires. I was well into my work and not inclined to conversation, and I was a little blunt. Very well, there's the axe. Go ahead and see what you can do. I went back to work, closing the door. At first, the sound of the boy dragging brush annoyed me, and then he began to chop. The blows were rhythmic and steady, and shortly I had forgotten him. The sound no more of an interruption than a constant rain. I suppose an hour and a half had passed, for when I stopped and stretched and heard the boy's steps on the cabin stoop, the sun was drooping from behind the farthest mountain, and the valleys were purple with something deeper than asters. The boy said, "I have to go to supper now, and I can come again tomorrow evening." I said, "I'll pay you for what you've done," thinking that I should probably have to insist on an older boy. 10 cents an hour? Oh, anything's all right. We went back together of the cabin. An astonishing amount of solid wood had been cut. There were cherry logs and heavy roots of rhododendron and the blocks of the waste pine and oak left from behind the building of the cabin. "But you've done as much as a man," I said. "This is a splendid pile." I looked at him, actually, for the first time. His hair was the color of corn shocks, and his eyes, very direct, were like the mountain sky when rain is pending, gray, with a shadowing of miraculous blue. As I spoke, a light came over him as though the setting sun had touched him, and the same suffused glory with which it touched the mountains. I gave him a quarter. "You may come tomorrow," I said, "and thank you very much." He looked at me, at the coin, and seemed to want to speak, but could not, and turned away. "I'll split kindling tomorrow," he said over his thin, ragged shoulder. "You need kindling, and medium woods, and logs, and back logs." At daylight, I was half awakened by the sound of chopping. Again, it was so even in texture that I went back to sleep. When I left my bed in the cool morning, the boy had come and gone, and a stack of kindling was neat against the cabin wall. He came again after school and the orphanage and worked until the time he had to return. His name was Jerry. He was 12 years old, and he had been at the orphanage since he was 4. I could picture him at 4, with that same grave, gray-blue eyes and that same independence? No. The word that comes to me is integrity. The word means something very special to me, and it is a quality for which I use in a rare one. My father had it, and there was another whom I'm almost sure, but almost no man of any acquaintance possesses it with the clarity and purity and the simplicity of a mountain stream. But this boy Jerry had it. It is betting on courage, but it's more than brave. It is honest, but it's more than honesty. The axe handle broke one day, and Jerry said that the wood shop at the orphanage would repair it. I brought money to pay for the job, and he refused to take it. "I'll pay for it," he said. "I broke it. I brought the axe down careless." "But nobody hits accurately every time," I told him. "It's the fault of the wood or the handle. I'll see from the man whom I bought it." It was only then that he would take the money. He was standing back of his own carelessness. He was a free will agent, and he chose to do careful work, and if he failed, he took the responsibility without subterfuge. And he did for me the unnecessary thing, the gracious thing, that we find done only by the great of heart. Things no training can teach, for they are done on the instant, with no predicated experience. He found a cubbyhole beside the fireplace that I had not noticed. There, of his own accord, he put the kindling and the medium wood so that I might always have a dry fire material ready in case of sudden wet weather. A stone was loose in the rough walk of the cabin, and he dug a deeper hole and he steadied it. Although he came himself by a short cut over the bank, I found that when I tried to return his thoughtfulness with things such as candy and apples, he was wordless. "Thank you" was perhaps an expression for which he had no use, for his courtesy was instinctive. He only looked at the gift and at me, and a curtain lifted so that I saw deeper into the clear well of his eyes, and gratitude was there, and affection, soft over the firm granite of his character. He made simple excuses to come and sit with me. I could no more have turned him away than if he had been physically hungry. I suggested once that the best time to visit was just before supper. And when I left off my writing, after that, he waited always until my typewriter had become quiet. One day, I worked until nearly dark. I went outside the cabin, having forgotten him. I saw him going up over the hill in the twilight toward the orphanage. When I sat down on my stoop, a place was warm from his body where he had been sitting. He became intimate, of course, with my pointer Pat. That is a strange communication between a boy and a dog. Perhaps they possess the same singleness of spirit, the same kind of wisdom. Oh, it's difficult to explain, but it exists. When I went across the state for a weekend, I left the dog in Jerry's charge. I gave him the dog whistle and the key to the cabin and left sufficient food. He was to come 2 or 3 times a day and let the dog out and feed and exercise him. I should return Sunday night, and Jerry would take out the dog for the last time Sunday afternoon and leave the key under the agreed hiding place. My return was belated, and the fog filled the mountain passes so treacherously that I dared not drive at night. The fog held the next morning, and it was Monday noon before I reached the cabin. The dog had been fed and cared for. That morning, Jerry came early afternoon, anxious. The superintendent said nobody would drive in the fog. He said, "I came just before bedtime last night, and you hadn't come. So I brought Pat some of my breakfast this morning. I wouldn't have let anything happen to him." I was sure of that. I didn't worry. When I heard about the fog, I thought, you'd know. He was needed for work at the orphanage, and he had to return at once. I gave him $1 in payment, and he looked at it and went away. But that night, he came in the darkness and knocked on the door. "Come in, Jerry," I said, "if you're allowed to be away so late." I told maybe a story, he said. I told them I thought you would want to see me. "That's true," I reassured him, and I saw his relief. "I want to hear about how you managed with the dog." We sat by the fire with me, and there was no other light. He told me of the 2 days together. The dog laid close to him and found a comfort there that I did not have for him. And it seemed to me that being with my dog and caring for him had brought the boy and me too together, so that he felt that he belonged to me as well as to the animal. He stayed right with me, he told me, except when he ran in the laurel. He likes the laurel. I took him up over the hill, and we both ran fast. There was this place in the grass that was so high. I laid down in it and I hid. I could hear Pat hunting for me. He found my trail and he barked. When he found me, he acted crazy, and he ran around and around me in circles. We watched the flames. "Oh, that's an apple log," he said. "It burns the prettiest of any wood." We were very close. He was suddenly impelled to speak of things that he had not spoken of before, nor had I cared to ask him. "You look a little bit like my mother," he said, "especially in the dark, by the fire." "But you were only 4, Jerry, when you came here. You have to remember how she looked all those years." "My mother lives in Mannville," he said. For a moment, finding that he had a mother shocked me as greatly as anything my life had ever done, and I did not know why it disturbed me. Then I understood my distress. I was filled with a passionate resentment that any woman should go away and leave her son. A fresh anger added itself. A son like this one? The orphanage was a wholesome place. The executives were kind, good people. The food was more than adequate. The boys were healthy. A ragged shirt was no hardship, nor the doing of the clean labor. Granted, perhaps, the boy felt no lack. What blood fed the bowels of a woman who did not yearn over the child's lean body that had come in perpetuation out of her own? At 4, he would have looked the same now, Nothing, I thought. Nothing in life could change those eyes. His quality must be apparent to an idiot, a fool. I burned with a question that I could not ask. In any, I was afraid that there would be pain. Have you seen her, Jerry, lately? Oh, I see her every summer. She sends for me. I wanted to cry out, well, then why are you not with her? Why can she not let you go away again? She comes up here from Mannville whenever she can. She doesn't have a job right now. His face shone in the firelight. She wanted to give me a puppy, but they can't let one boy keep a puppy. You remember that suit that I had on last Sunday? She sent me that for Christmas. Christmas before that, she sent me a pair of skates. Roller skates? My mind was busy, making pictures of her, trying to understand her. She had not then entirely deserted or forgotten him, but why then, I thought? I must not condemn her without knowing. Roller skates. I let the other boys use them. They're always borrowing them, but they're careful with them. What circumstance other than poverty? I'm going to take the $1 that you gave me for taking care of Pat and buy her a pair of gloves. I could only say, that would be nice. Do you know her size? I think she's 8.5, he said. Then he looked at my hands. Do you wear an 8.5? He asked. No, I wear a smaller size 6. Oh, then I guess her hands are bigger than yours. I hated her. Poverty or no, there was other food than bread, and the soul could starve as quickly as the body. He was taking his $1 to buy gloves for her big, stupid hands, and she lived away from him in Mannville and contented herself with just sending skates? She likes white gloves, he said. Do you think I can get them for $1? I think so, I said. I decided that I should not leave the mountains without seeing her and knowing for myself why she had done this thing. The human mind scatters its interest as though it's made of thistledown, and every wind stirs and moves it. I finished my work. It did not please me, and I gave my thoughts to another field. I should need some Mexican material. I made arrangements to close my Florida place, Mexico immediately, and do the writing there, if the conditions were favorable. Then Alaska with my brother. After that, heaven knew what or where. I did not take time to go to Mannville to see Jerry's mother, nor did I talk to the orphanage officials about her. I was a trifle abstracted about the boy because of my work and plans, and after my first fury at her, we did not speak of her again. His having a mother, any sort at all, not far away in Mannville, and it relieved me of the ache that I had about him. He did not question the relation. He was not lonely. It was not of any concern. He came every day and cut my wood and did small helpful favors and stayed to talk. The days had become cold, and I often let him come inside the cabin. He would lay on the floor in front of the fire, one arm across the pointer, and they would both doze and wait quietly for me. Other days they ran in a common ecstasy through the laurel, and since the asters were now gone, he brought me back vermilion maple leaves and chestnut boughs dripping with imperial yellow. I was ready to go. I said to him, "You have been a good friend, Jerry. I shall often think of you and miss you. Pat will miss you too. I'm leaving tomorrow." He did not answer. He went away. I remember that a new moon hung over the mountains, and I watched him go in silence up the hill. I expected him the next day, but he did not come. The details of packing my personal belongings, loading my car, arranging the bed over the seat where the dog would ride occupied me until late in the day. I closed the cabin and I started the car, noticing that the sun was in the west and I should do well be out of the mountains by nightfall. I stopped by the orphanage and left my cabin key and the money for my light bill with Miss Clark. "And will you call Jerry for me to say goodbye to him?" I don't know where he is, she said. I'm afraid he's not well. He didn't eat dinner this noon, and the other boys saw him going over the hill into the laurel. He was supposed to do the fire in the boiler this afternoon. It's not like him. He's usually reliable. I was almost relieved, for I knew I should never see him again, and it would be easier not to say goodbye to him. I said, well, I want to talk to you about his mother and why he's here, but I'm more of a hurry than I expected to be. It's out of the question for me to go see her now, but here is some money, and I'd like to leave it with you to buy him things at Christmas and on his birthday. It would be better than for me to try to send him things. I could so easily duplicate skates, for instance. She blinked her honest spinster eyes. There's no such need for skates here, she said. Her stupidity annoyed me. What I mean, I said, is that I don't want to duplicate things his mother sends him. I might have chosen skates if I didn't know how she'd already given them to him. She stared at me. I don't understand, she said. He has no mother. He has no skates. All right, so your job at this point in time is to pick a point in the story. Maybe perhaps the time where she says she's about to leave, and then I want you to rewrite the end of the story. Make sure that you include the characters. And since the climax had already occurred in the story, that she's about to leave, what I want you to write is I want you to write the following action that happens afterwards. It should be at least one paragraph, and I would like you to include some dialogue so that I can see if you know how to put that into the paper correctly or not. I hope you have a good day and a great spring break.